Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join me on Listen Up Homebuyers, the video podcast. This is episode 3 of how NAEBA members are helping everyone during the pandemic. All of the guests here are members of the National Association of Exclusive Buyer Agents from across the country. They do not have listings to sell, and we do not represent sellers. We are, as our name says, exclusive buyer agents. And with that, I'd like to introduce Lisa Velenovsky. She is an exclusive buyer agent with Buyer's Edge in the Washington, D.C. area, licensed in Virginia, D.C. and Maryland. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Vic.
James Deskin is the owner and broker of the Homebuyers Advocate in Columbus, Ohio. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Victoria.
David Kent is the broker owner of the Real Buyers Agent in Charleston, South Carolina.
Hello.
There you go. Nicholas Martin, an exclusive buyer agent with Buyers Choice Realty in Massachusetts. Hi, Nick. And Benjamin Clark. He is the principal broker of home buyer representation in Salt Lake City, Utah. Hi, Ben.
Hey, guys.
So it's a real pleasure to have everyone. And while I was doing my research for this video podcast, I wanted to learn a little bit about each of you. And on Jim's website, I read something that I really wanted to share and get your opinion and take on. And Jim, with your permission, I'll just go ahead. On his website, it says, sure, you know all the big real estate companies around, but how many of them are established to protect the rights of the buyer and not the seller? How many of them are there for the consumer, you? There are many good real estate companies, but the #1 goal of most of them is to sell houses and maybe even sell you one. It is not our job to sell you anything because we work on your side as the consumer. We don't sell houses, we represent buyers who buy them. So since I read off your website, Jim, you want to kick off and tell us a little bit about what made you write that?
Well, I wrote that after being in the business for a few years, and when I opened up the company about 14 years ago, and I just kind of thought through what drove me to this business. And I'd already done it for 10 years as an agent with another brokerage. And I just kind of thought, you know, what are the basics of how we do what we do and why we do it? I was drawn to working only with buyers because my background was in working with the public, and I kind of had an advocacy background, and the idea of helping people and protecting them really appealed to me. So that's really where I got the content for what I wrote there on the website. And I truly believe it that, you know, we're not here to sell anything. We're here to help people buy and make sure consumers get a fair shake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so Ben from Salt Lake City, you want to jump in and tell us, you know, why did you open your brokerage that way?
Yeah, so when I got my license over 20 years ago, I was a buyer's agent for a listing agent. And what that really meant was he would go out and get a bunch of listings, and back then he had signs he'd put in the yard. People would dial an 800 number for information because, of course, the flyers didn't have the price on them and all of that. And it was a lead capturing system for him. And then I would take the buyers, and my job, because I worked for the agent who worked for the seller, was to try and any buyer who called in, try and move that property. But I kind of didn't feel like I would want to be treated that way as a buyer. So I talked to the agent and said, hey, can I just, if a lead comes in and it's clearly not a good fit for them, can I help them buy, you know, whatever? And so I would walk them through the process and help them buy whatever home they wanted to, not just, you know, the listing agent's homes. And it kind of became, I noticed in the industry that buyers were less represented in general than sellers. You know, every home that's on the market with a listing brokerage has professional representation, but a lot of buyers were getting double dealed, you know, by the agents and not receiving a full level of representation. And so I saw that going on, and about 1.5 years in the business, I was on a trip to Palm Springs, California, and I ran across a buyer broker only flyer in a grocery store. And I read about it and I said, hey, that sounds like something I, you know, believe in, is representing the buyer and helping them get the best price instead of, you know, the highest price for the home, the best deal for the buyer. And it became something that I got really kind of passionate about. And I said, you know, when I go back to town, I've been working mostly with buyers anyway. I started taking a few listings because that's what they train you to do. but I really wanted to represent those buyers and give them fair representation in their transactions. And so I came back to town looking for a buyer-only brokerage, and there wasn't one in town. So I went to broker school, and a couple years later, I started my own company. And it wasn't even until like 4 or 5, maybe 6 years later that I ran across the National Association of Exclusive Buyer Agents. I thought I was the only, so first I thought everybody, there's got to be companies like this all over the place when I first saw that one company. And so I thought I'll just join one when I get back to Salt Lake. Found out there were none in the state that I could find. And then the next thing was, now that I was one, I thought I was one of the only ones. I thought it was maybe me and this guy. And then I came across NAEBA and of course realized that there are hundreds of exclusive buyer agents all around the country who believe the same things we do and trying to work for the buyers.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's a calling, right? I mean, David, Kent, you're in South Carolina. Tell us about how you got this started.
So my degree is in construction management, and moved to Charleston and started, I worked for a developer and builder, and eventually went out on my own building houses, and had a real estate company set up just to sell my houses. And people were coming to me, friends and family, and asking me to help them buy a home. And at the time, no one was representing buyers. It was all sub-agency. And I just thought that was weird. I mean, if you're going to buy a home, you need some representation. So decided to open up the first exclusive buyers agency in Charleston. You know, it was the buyer's agent franchise, Tom Hathaway. And, you know, just have enjoyed doing it. I stayed building for another like 10 years. And eventually now I'm just doing it full time since 2003, just representing buyers. And I've got 4 agents that are still with me that have been with me, you know, 15, 17, and 19 years. Wow. I don't recruit agents. I found that, you know, if they want to buy into it, they're going to call me. And if not, I just, you know, like the shop that I have, and I like the agents that I have I can trust, and I know they'll do a really good job. So it really was just something that I feel that the buyer needs. They need representation when they're buying a home, especially in the seller's market.
Oh, yeah. And you mentioned something that I'd like you to explain. You said it was only sub-agency. Can you tell everybody what that is?
Yeah, when I started, it was, so you had a listing agent who represented the seller, and anybody who brought a buyer, they were a sub-agent of the listing agent as well. So they didn't represent the buyer at all. They may have brought the buyer to the table, but that was the confusing part for buyers, I believe. They thought that agent was taking care of them, but at the time it was all sub-agency, no buyer agency.
Representation is the main thing that confuses consumers. I mean, there's no doubt. So Nick, we want to hear from you in Massachusetts. I know you're a new board member, but what else are you doing there, you know, as an exclusive buyer agent? What brought you in?
Well, I would say Ron Huth brought me in. I blame him. But ultimately, I was looking for a flexible schedule as a father of 2 kids and my wife going to work and whatnot like that. I really sought Ron out to become a home inspector. And then he said, well, why don't you come work for me? And I didn't know a whole lot about real estate at that time, but I did have a pretty bad past experience. And learning about exclusive agency through him, I realized how important that is, especially with the experience I had, which ultimately was losing my down payment because the bank didn't approve our loan before the contingency deadline, which was the deadline that you have to have a full approval by. Claimed they would, but didn't have it in hand, and ultimately denied my loan 2 days before closing.
Oh my God.
And yeah, long story short, lost our escrow money, lost everything, much of my life savings at the time. But as an agent who represents buyers, I definitely watch out for those things. And if for some reason we don't have everything in place, I do feel like it's my job to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen. And I see a lot of other agents out there taking buyers that seriously. I think it's a lot of, oh, let's get this house sold. And if something goes wrong with the buyer, then, oh, well, I'll sell it to the next person. So with that and all of the stuff that I've learned with exclusive agency, I don't know why I couldn't justify working any other way. I couldn't justify doing both. and being able to properly represent people. I wouldn't be able to do what I feel an agent is supposed to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Lisa Velenovsky, I want to hear your story. I know your story, but I'd like you to share it with everybody here, and of course, you know, all the consumers that are going to be listening too.
Well, absolutely. Actually, it never entered my mind to become a real estate agent at all. It just wasn't even on my radar, but there was a confluence of events that led me to where I am today. When my husband and I were leaving Chicago to move to DC, we had a business where we developed what they called serious games for education for K through 12 students. And I loved doing that because to me, it helped develop their critical thinking skills. And that was something that I loved doing. And I had just finished a big program for grades 6 through 8 where the kids got a loan, built a house, floor plan, landscaping, selected all the materials. Then they had to price the house, market the house, review potential buyers, and try to sell the house.
Wow,
and they also had to take into consideration environmental concerns, community concerns, and all of these things. And they were graded not only on their profit, but they were graded on how well they took into consideration community concerns. And that's what led them to the next level. So I had to learn a lot about houses. And I've always been really nosy. I'm one of those people who walks down the street at night and likes to look in windows and see what people have done to their houses. So I was fascinated. So when we moved to DC, we were looking for a house, and a friend of mine recommended Steve at Buyers Edge. So Steve was lovely. He took me out, and I just kept commenting on stuff. I'm like, wow, there's no vapor barrier under here. You can tell the floor is cupping. And he goes, well, have you ever thought about being a real estate agent? I said, no, I never thought about it. But then I recalled, well, it was hard to forget. When we moved from Chicago, we also had a horrible experience, a lot like Nick's, but we were on the seller side, and we had the supposedly number 2 agent in Chicago representing us, and the buyers had like the number 1 agent. The deal fell apart at closing on the loan. And I felt horrible for us, but I felt horrible for the buyers. So once I spent some time with Steve and started thinking, well, this would be advocating for buyers, advocating for one side, and education is a really important component of this. And education is something that I really love. So I thought, here's a way that I could advocate for buyers so that nothing happened for the buyer or the seller as what happened in our deal. But I could also help with the development of the critical thinking and the decision-making skills. I mean, to me, I want my buyers making an informed decision when we write an offer. I want them to feel that they're making an informed decision. So part of my job is to be a guide, but a large part of my job is to help educate my buyers. So I thought, well, this actually sounds like a place where I could do good and feel good and really put my education skills to work. And I love it. I love helping my buyers. It's just, there's no other feeling like that. And I did go for a couple of years, as you know, Vic. I left Buyers Edge and I went to a very large agency. And, in Virginia, they allow dual agency. And even though I'm licensed in Maryland, Virginia, and DC, I just had a problem with that. It never, ever felt right. Never, not even from day one. So luckily, everybody at Buyers Edge was, willing to welcome me back. And I've been back for about 8 months now. And it's the best move I've ever made.
Yeah. So just real briefly, you mentioned dual agency. Tell everybody who's listening, what is dual agency?
Well, in Virginia, dual agency is the fact that an agent can represent both sides of a transaction. And so in effect, they're not really representing anybody effectively. They really can't. You can't give advice. You can't do anything that's going to be a conflict of interest. So essentially, you're sort of a transaction manager is about all you are in Virginia, and you can, so you can do both sides of that. And really nobody's going to be getting adequate representation. And it just never felt right to me that you could do that. There's clearly a conflict of interest. I don't care what they say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one person who makes out like a bandit on that is the real estate agent, who is the agent, the dual agent.
Yes.
I will just add that the reason I got into this is I had a whole other career before this, and I too, kind of like all of you, I wanted to make a living, but I wanted to make a really honest living. And when I found out about this kind of representation, I thought, boy, I can wrap my head and my heart around that. And I had recently had an agent, you know, who had never heard of this kind of exclusive buyer agency. And she said, well, why on earth would you do that? And it occurred to me that if it doesn't, if it isn't something that is like in you, a choice that you really want to look out for people's best interests, it isn't going to be on your radar. But the way I basically responded was, it never occurred to me to do both sides. I wouldn't be in real estate. I would not be an agent if I had to say, oh yeah, I can represent you, Mr. Seller. Oh, hey, over there, Mr. Buyer, I can represent you, and, you know, pick up whatever in-house bonuses are available. All of that just turned me off, you know? So I'm just going to toss a couple things out, guys, and, you know, feel free to jump in. I want to know what market conditions are like and where you are. So if you don't mind, just jump in and tell us what's going on.
Well, in Virginia, Maryland, and DC, I mean, the market is still really, really crazy, especially for single family homes. All of my buyers in the last 4 months have had to go over list and dump some contingencies to get a ratified contract. I've seen anywhere from 2% to 15% over list, with people just throwing everything out the window.
Yeah.
It was even that way with the condos and the townhouses. Condos have slowed down a little bit in our market. Single family homes, it's still crazy. And of course, the inventory has dropped precipitously now that we've had Thanksgiving. But it has been crazy, and you had to pull out all the stops. And it's really, really been so important to educate my buyers, because they have to understand the ramifications of everything, and they have to feel comfortable. And I've, you know, found with many buyers that the more offers you make, the greater their confidence in what they're offering, and the greater their confidence in making a decision about whether or not they're going to ask for certain contingencies or not. So it is definitely a fast market, and a market where you really need to educate your buyers and communicate very, very closely with buyers.
And Jim Deskin, we want to hear from you. What's been happening in Columbus?
Yeah, so again, I am in Columbus, greater Columbus area. Our MLS, I believe we have 7 counties. The majority of listings, though, are probably in about 3 counties. Columbus sits in the middle of that, and I usually work in 2 or 3 counties. The market is crazy if you're a seller. Very similar to what Lisa described there. We are low on inventory. We have been for several years. Our running average inventory is, I think, around maybe 3,700 units. And 7 years ago, we had about 13,500. We're at 1.2 months of inventory, and we should, of course, as you all know, be at 6 months. So it's very difficult. This year has been extremely difficult for really everybody in my market. One, because of the inventory, and of course, because of COVID and how that's affected it. So we typically have multiple offers, even up into the higher price points. There have been houses I have heard that had 30 offers on them, which is unheard of here. I believe I had one last year that had maybe 32 offers. The average being probably 5 to 7 offers on any house that goes on the market. Really up and even into the higher price points. As Lisa said, we're moving contingencies to be competitive. And it's not uncommon for a house to go 10% over asking price. So it's rather difficult, especially for somebody who works only with buyers. You know, I've scratched my head the last few years because of this. The odd and ironic thing is, though, in this extremely difficult market for everybody, even with COVID, I've had the best year I've ever had. So I don't understand how that happened, especially considering where all of us were at back in the spring.
Yeah.
But there's something about the market and the anxiety that has propelled buyers into getting into the market and staying in it.
Ben Clark, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about what Lisa said. You know, she talked about educating the buyers about the competition. And some of that is, some buyers just need to go through that process a time or two. And so when I meet with clients for the first time, right now our market is very seller leaning as well. And it's taking my clients on average 5 to 6 offers before we get a contract. And I think that really puts my clients at ease, knowing that the competition is going to be kind of fierce, and we're going to write offers and we're not going to get them. And we don't have to, in our market, yes, you could throw 10% on and probably get it, but you don't have to if you're willing to work on the other aspects of it and be smart about how you're finding the homes, you know, catching homes on the rebound after they don't appraise or they have inspection issues, you know, being creative with contingencies. So rather than remove contingencies altogether, sometimes, like, we just have 3 clients that went under contract in the last couple of weeks, and we said we won't ask the seller to do any repairs unless they're over $1,000. So still protecting the buyer, so they're not just saying, hey, we'll lose it all if we find something, and we're telling the seller up front we're not going to ask for any money for that. But making the seller feel at ease, because a lot of buyers are putting things under contract, waiving contingencies, and then canceling out and leaving the seller high and dry, you know, weeks into the transaction. Yeah. So it makes our offer appear even stronger, even though we're still protecting our client. Another thing, you hear a lot from the traditional agents that we're low on inventory. If you look at our active listings, we're about 3,000. But if you look at the actives plus the under contract listings, and that includes homes that are active with a backup status. So they're not fully active, but they're under contract looking for potential backups. We've got about 9,000 of those. So in reality, we have about 12,000 listings, but on any given day, there's only 3,000 of those available. Mm-hmm. And then if you add on the number of homes that have sold in the last 30 days, there's a lot of inventory. It's just going really quick. And so it's not like there's a housing shortage. There are no homes. It's that on any given day, there are very few available. So if the client has the ability to understand that this is going to be a process of a couple months, rather than, hey, we go out 1, 2, 3 times and we're under contract, that allows us to more effectively find and negotiate a deal amongst the mix. You know, sometimes, like I said, we have homes that for whatever reason have been under contract 2, 3 times, they fail. That seller is starting to question things, especially if it's been back on the market. It's the 3rd time and they haven't had any showings anymore because they're 90+ days on the market. It doesn't mean the home's a bad home, especially if they were significantly overpriced at the beginning. Those buyers are taking off sometimes because they feel buyer's remorse for overpaying for a house they shouldn't have. Yeah. And so we're picking up those homes on the rebound. We are still trying to play the upfront game where you get in on the first day of listing and try and negotiate something before they have a ton of offers. But yeah,
you mentioned a lot of strategies that I know a lot of us in the Buyer's Edge brokerage are using. You know, whether it's you know, getting creative in a lot of ways. Sometimes it's giving up a contingency, and sometimes, as I tell a lot of my clients, let's not chase, you know, the pretty shiny objects every single time they come on the market. And depending on how comfortable they are moving into a place that needs a little bit of work, that's where you've got some wiggle room, you know. And David, I saw you nodding your head a whole bunch. Did you want to jump in and add something?
Yeah, we're in the same scenario with kind of low inventory. We're right around 2,300 listings, and last year this time we had 5,500 listings. But our market is, we have a lot of unique markets in the Charleston area. We have historic downtown. We've got islands, barrier island homes. We have resorts. We have Kiowa, Seabrook, Wild Dunes, and then the suburbs. And as you get further away from the coast is where the growth area is, and that's where most of the new construction is happening. So I agree with Ben. You have to be creative with your buyers, and you, Victoria, with understanding that when a new listing comes on the market, you're probably not going to be able to negotiate much, and they have to understand that. If they don't understand that, then they're going to go through that a couple of times and realize that they're going to probably be, if the house is in good shape and priced well. But we're very, very diverse in our, you know, the industry that we have here. We have a port. And I think we're the first one on the East Coast that has 52 feet. So we're bringing a lot of cargo through our port that now spins off. We have Boeing building their Dreamliner here. We got Volvo building their cars here. We got Sprinter vans. So we're very, very diverse. And so it's bringing a lot of people from other areas, plus the people who just want to come to Charleston, live, and they can work remote. A majority of my buyers this year have probably been from the Northeast, where they either can retire or just they want to, you know, work in a warmer climate, and they can. But yeah, I think I echo exactly what Ben's saying. You have to educate them, and sometimes they take a little while to understand what's the dynamics of the market. I send out an update once a week to all my clients that are looking, and showing homes that are going under contract, because I like that dynamic. And we're exceeding what we did last year, which was a record year. So educating is a big part. And then once they find the house, making sure they understand what they have and what the pitfalls of buying that house currently would be.
Right. I think education is the one common theme that goes throughout all the NAEBA members. Advocacy, education, informed consumer. You know, that's the powerful message that we can share with buyers for sure. And Nick, speaking of the Northeast, you know, what's happening in your market in Massachusetts?
It's crazy, like they said. I would agree a lot with Ben, where we have a low inventory, but it's not as low as it seems because things are moving fast. So state of Massachusetts, I would say on an average year, statewide, is somewhere between 10 and 12,000 listings are available. Right now, the availability day to day is around 4,000. So it's really low, but there's a lot of houses that are moving. So I'm just going to throw some numbers out there. They might seem a little bit high, but the average affordable house in the Boston area is between $400,000 and $600,000. Those are the houses that disappear in a day. Like, they sometimes aren't even on 24 hours before they're under agreement. And I would say we have a good number of those. I get a listing from our local news guy from Ipswich that gives us kind of a rundown of the North Shore, which is the north of Boston area. The closings that have happened on the North Shore. And within 2 weeks, we're still averaging 40 to 60 closings within the North Shore area, which covers about a population of around 800,000 people. So it's moving, it's happening, but just the options are disappearing as quickly as they come. So if you're not on top of it, and speaking of education, if your client is not educated on the market and how it's moving, they're going to miss out on that perfect opportunity.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I wanted to ask a little bit more of those of you who are been doing this for a long time. How, when you're educating your clients, how long do you usually think it takes for somebody to get up to speed and ready to be on the same page with you in terms of, you know, how many offers they have to be making and so forth? Anybody can jump in on that.
I'm in this market. I'm finding that it probably takes about 5 or 6 offers to lose before they're a combination of confident in what they want to offer and their ability to actually get ratified. And like everybody else has said, you know, it is an education process for them and a process for us, you know, on our side. I think for me, it's really making sure that I've built the rapport with the listing agent for properties that my clients like, and understanding what's going to resonate with the sellers to create the best possible offer package for both people. But I'm finding that to get to that point, that sweet spot for my buyers, it's taking about 5 or 6 offers to lose.
Okay. Anybody want to? Yeah, Ben.
I wanted to talk about what she just said. It's absolutely correct. I mean, we as buyer's agents, we're pulling out all the stops. We're pulling out all the things from our bag of tricks regarding negotiations, all the skills that we've learned over the years. We're having to use every one of them in this market. And being represented by an agent who has those skills is more important than ever. A lot of traditional agents are starting to learn some of these things because out of necessity, because there is so much competition. But we've got them all. We've been studying this for, 20, 30 years, how to represent the buyer, how to get our deal accepted, even if it's not the highest price, how to keep a contingency in and still win an offer that doesn't have that. And these are things that we can't guarantee will work every time, but we try every time. And like she said, talking to those listing agents, getting as much story on the sellers and their disposition and what's important to them. So that's one of the things I like to do is ask the listing broker, hey, or the listing agent, what's important to your client? Because the price is important. That's almost, they always say number one, but what else is important? Is the time frame important? Do they have a home they're trying to close on in a certain time? If we can speed up ours and make our deadlines tighter or do whatever we can to make our offer more attractive, it doesn't always have to be way over the asking price. It doesn't have to be the highest price, but obviously that helps, but it doesn't have to be if you can find out those details. So having good good rapport with those listing agents, giving information that we can give them to help, and getting information from them that we can give to our client, we can put an offer together that's exactly what that seller is looking for without just throwing extra money on top to try and get it. That's what most listing or most traditional agents are trying to do right now, is telling their clients, oh, you've just got to throw extra money on it and to win. And that's not what it's all about. I mean, yeah, it can help. And we've lost to some of those that have overpaid by 40 or 50,000, but we don't want to overpay by 40 or 50,000. So that's what we're dealing with. Some of the competition is industry created by uninformed agents who are giving bad information to their clients. So by us giving them good information, the client can make a good decision. And that's what Lisa said at the beginning that I really resonated with.
I really am very glad that we have appraisal contingencies and appraisers going out there and keeping things kind of more level and more sane, because, you know, recently I had a client miss out on a property, and then I watched that property after it went under contract. And this was a little end unit townhouse in, you know, Southwest Washington, D.C., and somebody paid $120,000 over list price. And I talked to my client, and he goes, yeah, did you see what that sold for? And I said, yeah, and I'm glad it wasn't you, because I want to have a relationship with you when we're done with this, you know. The worst thing that could happen is buyer's remorse. You know, 120 grand over, I think it was 1,400 square feet. It's nuts. It's nuts. So anybody want to take a stab at where this market, because we're all pretty much on the same page no matter where we are in the country, where is this market headed?
I'll take a stab at it. Obviously nobody knows the future, but for our state, at least, it's like David said, for his area, very attractive. So a lot of people who are working remotely, a lot of people are realizing even within the state that they can move to a less expensive part of the state and work remotely, go into the office once or twice a week or once or twice a month instead of every day. So I think there's some expanding into the suburbs or into the more rural areas that is going to be happening. As far as the activity level, I mean, it's just a matter of supply and demand. So there are places in the country that probably have more supply and less demand. I think buyer representation tends to be more attractive and work better in areas that are flourishing and growing, and where being represented is important. So I think in our markets, all the markets that we've talked about, the demand will continue to be high because people are going to keep moving into our areas. And how long that lasts, I think it's years. I think, you know, if I had to guess, my best guess is that's going to go on, at least in Utah, for years.
Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in with what's happening? What do you predict where this will go?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Ben there. As far as the market and where it's going, you know, we're low on inventory like a lot of you are, and I think it's going to be a while before that changes. It was very slow to lose that inventory. I think it's going to be very slow to gain that back. So I think we're in this for the long run. You know, as long as interest rates stay low and there is expansion in these markets, as Ben said, you know, moving to the suburbs, we have some uniqueness here, well, maybe somewhat unique in that they're building a lot of condos in the inner city and downtown, but they're also building in the suburbs. So we do have movement and expansion, but the problem is the builders can't keep up with the desire. So I agree with Ben. I think this is going to be a long-term thing, and I think it's going to be challenging for the next couple of years at least. And I think the whole COVID thing throws another wrench into that. Although one thing Ben said I think is really paramount, and that is that we're learning things, and we're pulling out all the stops and using things that we've learned over the years to be better agents in this market, in all of our markets, it appears. And I think a lot of the challenges have caused us to say, well, look what we do. We are better. We know the tricks. We've been working with buyers longer. And I think that's really, as far as my perspective, it's helped me be a better agent. We've had to think more and work harder and be better to be competitive. And, you know, I don't think that's going to change either. We need to continue to excel in what we do and show people that, you know, if you're a buyer, you need the person that we are. You need somebody like us.
Right, right. Because this is what we specialize in, you know. David and Nick, any last words before we wrap this up?
I agree with you. I think our problem, like in other areas, not only do we have inventory problems, we have a growth problem. And so municipalities are making it more difficult to build, and it takes longer to develop. And that just kind of exacerbates the whole problem of trying to bring inventory on that would help our market. But we've got some growth issues keeping up with infrastructure. And so I think we're going to be pretty strong. I think it's going to be a seller's market for another year or two, at least.
Nick, what about you?
Yeah, Boston, I think, is a little bit different. We kind of got hit hard pretty early with COVID. And so I think that knocked the inventory down pretty early. So I talked to some other people too, and I'm kind of predicting once vaccines can come out and it starts generally becoming safer again, we're going to see an uptick in availability of houses in our area. Not that it's going to all of a sudden become a buyer's market, but it might even it out just a little bit for a little while. Could sink back into a seller's market very quickly, or it could continue trending over to a buyer's market. But considering nationwide, it sounds like we'll be in a seller's market for some years to come, especially with low interest rates and whatnot. It probably even out in Boston. I mean, Boston's constantly got a lot of rotation happening. It's one of those towns where there's always people moving in and always people moving out. So I think it will neutralize, but eventually probably go back to that seller's market as long as the rest of the country's in that position, especially if interest rates stay low.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Lisa Velenovsky, David Kent, James Deskin, Ben Clark, Nick Martin, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you joining me and taking the time basically to educate consumers about who you are and what you do to help buyers across the company as representatives of and members of NAEBA. So thank you so much for joining me on Listen Up Homebuyers, and I hope you join me for the next podcast. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
It was a
you.
pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.